We're going to turn now to Washington, and we welcome from Capitol Hill Republican Representative Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, a ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee. Welcome, Mr. Congressman. Great to have you here.
Hey. Thank you, David.
We want to talk to you specifically about the testimony coming up from Chairman Powell, but before that, we have to at least ask for any reactions you might have to this escalating tension between India and Pakistan.
Well, look, this is a historic conflict that the generations have contended with. The tension there is not new, but how it has flared up is new. It is of great concern to policymakers here in Washington, and a great concern about systemic risk globally when you have threats like this erupting.
Okay, so Congressman, let's turn to that testimony of Chairman Jay Powell that's coming up. You're going to be asking him questions, as will other of your colleagues. We heard from him in the Senate yesterday. What do you want to hear today that you didn't hear yesterday?
Well, I think we want to get another layer deeper, because we have a great economy, very strong economy, but the risks that we're facing to our economy are global in nature, meaning the China debt load is of concern, the weakening China economy, the weakening of the European economy, as well as the concerns about an orderly Brexit or a less orderly Brexit, as well as these global tensions that we're seeing erupting not just in the Middle East, but further east.
And there's a limit to what the Congress, even the Congress as powerful as it can do about some of those problems. One of the issues that came out yesterday was Chairman Powell's concern about the U.S. debt. You referred to the China debt, but we have our own issue. He pointed out that, in fact, we're borrowing faster than we're growing our GDP. That's something actually Congress could do something about. What do you hope to hear from Chairman Powell on that subject?
Well, I think what he said is commensurate with all Fed chairs. Debt and deficits do matter. They do have an impact on the economy. Any sort of monetary theory that comes up that supposes that debt and deficits don't matter simply is not genuine economic thought that is enduring in nature. And so I think for him to highlight that is really important. That's something that I've highlighted. The fact that he mentions health care as being one of the major drivers of our debt and deficit, I agree with, and that was a great work left undone from the last Congress. But getting back to the fundamentals, how do we get a more vibrant workforce? How do we get rising wages? How are those things embedded in the economy and happening as a result of regulatory relief and tax relief that we have provided? That's what I want to hear a layer deeper on as well.
One of the things he talked about specifically with respect to the labor force was not just tax cuts, but also training, making sure that people have the education, the training they need so that they can actually get the jobs that are being developed today as opposed to the relatively unskilled jobs of yesterday. Is Congress willing to move forward on that?
We have. 3 years ago, we passed a major restructuring of our training and workforce development programs. College is accessible to everyone in this country that wants to access it. And we have a variety of training programs now that are focused on the next generation of jobs. That is happening. We need to make sure we enhance that, both at the state and the federal level. And I think that's a really important thing, to make sure that we get blue-collar folks in a rising wage environment, folks in the middle class experiencing and feeling prosperity like the rest of the economy is showing.
Congressman, something was covered in the prepared remarks yesterday from Chairman Powell, but really wasn't discussed much at all in the hearing, was the balance sheet, the so-called Fed balance sheet, and the rolling off of that. As we know from the minutes of the last meeting, they have been rolling it off, they've been reducing it, but they said they expect sometime this year to stop that. Do you have a point of view, should Congress have a point of view on how large that balance sheet should end up being?
Well, I mean, I think the balance sheet needs to be smaller, the footprint of the Fed needs to be smaller, and the intervention in our economy needs to be less. But that is a broader conversation. The Fed has a $4 trillion balance sheet. And what Chairman Powell's outlined is that the dating of these securities is the result. It results in a tapering of that balance sheet. I think we need to have a better understanding of the way forward, not just for the next quarter or 2 quarters, but sort of the longer-term view, because this is going to be a generational issue of shrinking the Fed balance sheet.
Yeah, it is a generational and, if you will, a philosophical issue perhaps as well. Do you have a number in your mind, roughly, not precisely, but roughly, of how big that balance sheet should be? Because right now it looks like if they stop this year, we're talking maybe $3.5 trillion, something like that, significantly larger than it was before we began this run-up.
Well, Look, I believe in the independence of the Fed to make monetary policy. I do have opinions that I want the balance sheet smaller, but for me to say as a policymaker what that size is, I don't think is appropriate. I think smaller is better than larger, and that's my bias. But the Federal Reserve and our monetary policy setting board needs to make that decision.
Well, you've said, and others certainly have said as well, it's very important we maintain the independence of the Federal Reserve.
Yes.
That's critically important. Are you concerned at all about pressure being put by President Trump and in general administration on this Fed? Because it seems to be more than we've seen for at least some years.
Every president has had opinions about monetary policy, and since we created the Federal Reserve 100 years ago, no president has lacked opinions about monetary policy as it affects their politics. The difference with President Trump is he tweets it, and it lets his feelings known more broadly than perhaps FDR did. But certainly FDR had his complaints about the Fed in its time. So this is not new. Just the circumstances of how the president communicates is new. I believe Jay Powell and the rest of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors know that they're independent and are acting with that independence in mind.
Okay, thank you so very much, Congressman. Really appreciate your time today. This Republican Representative Patrick McHenry of North Carolina. Alex?
As we know, FDR didn't have Twitter.